We've all heard the statement that rules are meant to be broken. And yes, in some cases that is true, such as teachers being allowed to photocopy materials for their classes. But when it comes to the guidelines of ethical experimentation in sociology, those rules cannot be broken. I've completed a lot of in-depth research on the guidelines of ethical experimentation, on a study that was deemed unethical, and through many other sources. So today we're going to cover what makes an experiment ethical, and an experiment that was deemed unethical, and why it was unethical. So first today we're going to talk about the guidelines of ethical experimentation. According to the American Sociological Association of 2017, there are 6 guidelines, but the first 3 have to do with before and during the experiment. So the first one is informed consent. Informed consent is any participant in your study first of all needs to know that they're part of a study. They can't be an anonymous person that you pull in. And second of all, they need to know exactly what the study's purpose is and what research you're trying to pull. The second one is protection. When you're working with a group that is more vulnerable, such as the elderly or children, they need to be taken special care of. Such as children, you need to know that their attention spans are short and that they might get tired easily. And the last one is deception. That goes back to informed consent as well. They need to know they're part of a study. But also, there's these things called confederates, which is people that are set up in the study to give false information. Technically, that is not ethical. As well as they need to know the full purpose and they cannot be set up in any way. The second part of the guidelines have to do with what the research is going to do afterwards. According to the American Sociological Association 2017, there's something called withdrawal. That is, at any point, the participant can choose to get out of the study. There's also the debrief. What that means is they're allowed to talk to the psychologist after the experiment and decide and talk about what research was found, as well as they can know the results. And the last is confidentiality. That is, the participant, when the research is released, their identity is to be kept secret unless given complete and utter permission by the participant. Now that we've talked about the guidelines that you need to keep in mind when experimenting, we're going to talk about an experiment that was deemed unethical. According to Reynolds' 2013, there was something called the monster study. That took place in the 1930s by Wendell Johnson. Wendell Johnson was born in 1906 and attended college in 1926 at the age of 20. He developed a stutter at the age of 5 or 6. He developed this stutter because one of his teachers told his parents that he was developing a stutter, when in all actuality he wasn't. He became so obsessed with not stuttering that he gave himself a stutter. He was known as the class clown, but also was the valedictorian of his high school in Roxburgh, Kansas. He decided that he wanted to study English at the University of Iowa. The reason he decided to study English was due to the fact that his stutter was so bad that he was sometimes unable to be understood. But when he actually got to the university, he found out that there was a program completely centered around stuttering, and that piqued his interest. So he decided to switch his majors to be a psychology major. While there, he found that he and 30 other students all had horrible stutters and were in this program. They actually experimented on each other. This would include things like drawing blood and electroshock therapy. As well as they would do this thing, they would cast their dominant arm because they felt as though if the dominant arm was immobile, it would stop the stutter. According to SciBlog 2007, Johnson wanted to learn if a stutter was biological or a learned behavior. So he decided to conduct the monster study. He took 22 orphans and divided them into 2 groups, 11 in each group. There was what he called the stutterer group and the normal group. In the stutterers group, there were 6 children who spoke normally, and there were 5 students that showed signs of stuttering. And with the normal speakers, they were given positive encouragement all throughout this school, but for the second group, which was called the stutterers, they were given negative reinforcement constantly. They were told they were going to stutter, and they were told things such as they were stuttering even if they weren't. He also hired teachers into the school and unknowingly put them in the position to also disencourage the stutterers. So the teachers were told that this group were stuttering students whether they were or not. And so now we're going to talk about the results. Now the weird thing about this study is they never formally published the results because Johnson was afraid that it would be compared to that of the Nazis at the time. Out of the 6 normal students in the stuttering group, 5 of them actually developed a stutter. In the normal group of speakers, only 1 child developed stuttering. Seeing as though he saw that his experiment had things such an impact on the kids' lives, he decided to try and undo the stutters. But unfortunately, he could not. It had a permanent effect on these children for the rest of their lives. Now that we've talked about the guidelines of sociological experimentation, and we've talked about an experiment deemed unethical, we're going to talk about why it was deemed unethical. So first we have that he broke informed consent. The children that he took were not aware that they were part of a study, and they weren't aware of what he was trying to do. As well as the teachers that he brought into the school, they were not aware that they were technically lying to these children, as well as deception. They were told they were stutterers when they were not. So that was one way he deceived them. As well as the teachers, he told them that they were stutterers when they were not. At any point, they could not have withdrawn from the experiment. Seeing as though he picked orphans, they had no parents that could have pulled them out, and they had no one really to care for them, as well as the debrief. The children were never told about the experiment, and they were never really informed of what the experiment was trying to do. I'd like to leave you with a few thoughts. So we looked at what makes an experiment ethical, we looked at an unethical experiment, and we looked at why it was unethical. I hope now that you know more about ethical experimentation and why it is so important. Although the children were negatively affected, and unfortunately that can never be undone, this study did shed a light on the toll of speech problems, stuttering, and the importance of ethical experimentation. Thank you.